So good morning and welcome to our very first event of the new year, which is promoted by the Irish Embassy to Italy together with Istituto Luigi Sturzo, and is a special conversation with our guest of today, the President of the Eurogroup, Pascal Donohoe. So thank you very much, President, for being with us. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have you here. And let me convey also the greetings of our President, Professor Nicola Antonetti, who unfortunately cannot be here with us. We are particularly glad to start the year with such an event, focusing on what is happening at the European Union level. Our institute has a long-standing tradition focusing on Europe and the European Union. Since its foundation in 1951, our institute aimed at contributing to the debates, providing the tools to understand the transformation of our society, but also ideas and more concrete proposals in terms of policies. And this has always been done with a special focus on the European Union and what happens at the European level. And let's not forget that our founder, Luigi Sturzo, already in the 20s was mentioning and talking about the United States of Europe as a long-term perspective. So in the last few years, our European and international sector, which I have the honor to lead, has been growing and further consolidating, working together with our institutions, such as the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also together with our think tanks, such as the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies. And together we promote several different and numerous initiatives to reflect on the future perspectives of our Europe, and also to propose reforms to concretely relaunch the European integration project. We are doing this trying also to raise the awareness and the understanding of the citizens, always looking at democracy, at the relationship between people, power and institutions, at the challenges of our contemporary society. And let me take this opportunity also to remind you that soon we will launch the new edition of the School of Politics, in which we will explore the uncertainty of Europe. An uncertainty caused, first of all, by the war in Ukraine. We know that the war in Ukraine is representing a huge test for Europe, putting under pressure our people, our institutions, our economy from different points of view. So Europe is definitely facing a great challenge, but also a time of great uncertainty and insecurity. We know that in the last decades, this crisis prompted the European Union to react, to come up with creative solutions, to find again its unity, and sometimes to re-emerge even stronger and even more united. And now, let's see, together with our special guest of today, what the future of our economy looks like. I mean, how the euro will weather the current economic and political climate, what are the future perspectives, how to leverage the resilience of Europe and the European Union, and if many of the European success stories have been built on times of crisis, let's ask ourselves, is this also the case if we look at euro? This is exactly what we are going to talk today together with Pascal Donohoe, the president of the Eurogroup. Pascal Donohoe is the Minister for Public Expenditure, National Development Plan Delivery and Reform of Ireland. He was re-elected for its second term as president of the Eurogroup recently, a second term which will officially start very soon on the 13th of January. Previously, he served as Minister for Finance of Ireland from 2017 to 2022, but also as Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, and Minister of State for European Affairs. So what an impressive political career. To chair this special conversation, I will leave the floor to Eleonora Polli, who is a senior expert at the Italian Ministry of Economics and Finance, and also the head of economic analysis at the Centers for European Policy Network. So President Donohoe, again, it's really an honor to have you here. Let me thank again the Irish Embassy for suggesting such an event, and I will leave you the floor, and I wish you a fruitful conversation. Thank you very much. And Eleonora, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, Loredana. Yes, as you were saying, I think we're facing not just, a time of crisis, but maybe a time of permanent crisis, in the sense that in the last 10 years, the European Union and the Eurozone has been challenging by many different crises. And I think the nature and also the structure of those crises and uncertainty have been reflected, and in a way, member countries has been trying, to find solutions to overcome. But I would like to give the floor to the Minister, because I'm sure he can share with us his insights on the future of the Eurozone and the current challenges we are facing.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, look, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody, and best wishes to all of you for a happy and healthy 2023. I'm really delighted to be here in Rome today. This is the first visit that I have made to a member of the Euro area in 2023, and also during the start of my second term as President of the Eurogroup. And what a wonderful country, what an important economy to begin a visit to. And also, it's not every Monday morning that I begin my working week in a palazzo in a room like this. So a great way to begin the week, and I'm very much looking forward after this event to meeting my colleague and your Minister Giancarlo, and having a discussion with him about many of the themes that my fellow panellists have just introduced. And when I meet Minister Giorgetti later on today, while I will of course always be reminded of the scale of challenge that we face and the work, thank you, and the work that we do need to do in the time ahead, I'm also reminded whenever I meet a finance minister within the European Union and within the Euro area of how much we have in common, of our shared values, our shared culture, and our shared outlook. And of course, this is a point that I hope does not really need to be made in an institute like this and in a city and country like this, because I'm here today in a country that has the richest of histories at the heart of Europe, and of course our surroundings are literally a reminder of that. Frescoes that date back to the Renaissance, signalling literally the rebirth of Europe, beginning here in Italy during the Middle Ages. And I had a furthermore recent example of this when I had the great pleasure of a tour of the library of this wonderful institute, and to see the archives and the papers and the contemporary and detailed history that is stored and archived here. Again, it is a reminder to me as a citizen and as a member of a government in a country on the western edge of Europe and on the western edge of the European Union, that again, the cultural foundations and all that we have in common remain very, very deep. And of course, Italy has used that cultural heritage and that history as a founding member of the European Union to be a driver of our unity, a driver of our integration, and is always making the case for more ambition in our objectives and for the European project. And we are reminded at the moment that that project is at the very heart of it, a peace project. And in so many ways, we succeeded in that original mandate as our union expanded and as it brought concord and cohesion to the furthest reaches of our continent. However, that therefore is a project that has been so fundamentally challenged today, because we have bloodshed on our borders, we are dealing with the horrific consequences of the war on the people of Ukraine and the economic consequences of that war on the EU and on the West. But as we discuss and reflect on those economic consequences that are so fundamental to the performance of the euro area last year and in the year to come, we do so conscious also of the need to put those economic consequences in context, that the cause of them is an attack on democratic and on rules-based order, the principles that are at the heart of the European project, which is why we must play the role that we are playing at the moment in supporting the people of Ukraine, because what they in turn are doing are defending the values that are at the heart of Europe. But as that war unfolds, and as the consequences of it also become broader and challenging, I'll make the case here this morning that I firmly believe that, as with every other crisis the European Union has faced, it is one that we will ultimately emerge stronger from and also more united from. So at the moment, as we look into the time ahead, we are facing a time of challenge. We are facing a time of great uncertainty. Soaring energy prices as a result of Russia's actions, in turn driving inflation to record highs. We are indeed facing a great economic test, and one that follows on so quickly from the consequences of the pandemic. But despite this, despite the immensely challenging economic environment, the euro area and the Italian economy proved its resilience in 2022 and performed better than many would have expected. The estimates of growth within the euro area for last year averaged 3.2%, and growth was unexpectedly positive through the first 3 quarters of the year. And your growth rate here in Italy exceeded that performance at 3.8%. So there are many different reasons for that, but one of them is the growing and deepened resilience of the euro area in the face of shocks, and in particular external shocks. It shows that many of the different policies that we have had in place at a national and at a European level have worked and have made a difference. And this resilience is perhaps best demonstrated by what has happened with jobs. The fact that we now have a record low level of unemployment in the euro area at 6.5% towards the end of last year. But we do all of this while facing a very difficult challenge. We are seeing economic activity slow down, and this is happening in the context of high rates of inflation. And this in turn means an erosion and a weakening in the ability of households and citizens to maintain their living standards, in turn affecting confidence in the future. So as finance ministers, we must act to reduce inflation, and we will. The alternative of this is to make our citizens even poorer for longer, and this would be an unacceptable outcome. The inflation that emerged in the past year has prompted a very significant change in the monetary stance of the European Central Bank through a series of large rate rises. And inflation is therefore causing growth to slow. As a result, we anticipate that the euro area will contract in the early part of the year, with likely modest growth of 0.3% for 2023. So this in turn means that the Eurogroup has to look at how we can better coordinate our economic policies to give ourselves every chance that any slowdown is one that is short-lived. And an immediate and pressing issue, therefore, surrounds the energy support measures that are currently in place across our countries. At 1.2% of national income for the euro area, they are significant and they have played a very important role. The work that awaits us as we consider their future level and their future design is what decisions we need to take to continue to try to support growth while at the same time avoiding adding to inflationary pressures. So, as part of Europe's response to high energy prices, we will need to consider this issue in the time ahead, with a window of opportunity awaiting in terms of policy design and policy scale. Our aim will be to work together to put in place measures that are better coordinated, that support those who need help, while being affordable. And at the same time we do this, while committing to investment levels that are adequate across the euro area, given the many pressing investment needs that we have with regard to the digital agenda, climate financing, and of course, defence. We need to do this while accelerating the decarbonisation of our economies and reducing energy dependence on Russia. The European Union has already taken steps to reduce our carbon emissions by at least 55% in 2030, and these changes are necessary and they have to be built upon. In our December Eurogroup meeting, we agreed, therefore, that we need to strengthen our coordination of national budgetary policies to fit the goal of fighting inflation. We agreed that if price pressures diminish, we need to look at these measures. We need to look at their design, because it is also imperative that we don't undermine the single market and we continue with our shared efforts to tame inflation. So this is why it is so important that monetary, budgetary, and energy policies better act together. Lack of progress in one policy strand increases the difficulty for policymakers in other domains. But we'll do this also conscious of the big opportunities that await. And those opportunities are significant. Given the new geopolitical reality that we confront together, we must look at how the EU can become even better placed to become the global leader in renewable energy, and for the euro in turn to become a global currency that is most associated with and most benefiting from the transition to a lower carbon future. And we can do this because we have given ourselves the means to fulfill our green ambition and create the conditions for sustainable growth. Next Generation EU, an €807 billion fund aiming to create a greener, a more digital, and a more resilient future. And this, coupled with the €20 billion of new grants from Repower EU, does mean that the tools are there to make progress on that aim. And such a tool such as Next Generation EU, funded as it is through common debt issued by the European Union, would have been unthinkable a few short years ago. It only became a reality when it became clear that the scale of economic challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic could not be overcome by acting alone. And the creation of this instrument, in turn, was made possible by the rigorous commitments made by each member state towards their reforms and towards accountability in investments. And this is why we all have such a role to play in implementing these agreed commitments, because it is so important for even further building trust ahead, and so important for responding back to the geopolitical and economic situation we confront. Any step that can be taken to strengthen our union sends a strong signal in terms of solidarity, coordination, and strength. And this is why I'm also convinced that it is important that we achieve progress on the ratification and implementation of the ESM Treaty. It gives us more common tools, not least by introducing a further financial backstop in the case of a bank failure. And these are all of the kind of changes, the deepening of our shared architecture, that will continue to build the resilience of the euro in the time ahead. And this has been recognised very recently in Croatia's adoption of the euro from the 1st of January this year. Building on the expansion of the single market, our shared currency is now one of the most tangible achievements of European integration. It's something we use every day. It's something that makes our lives so easier in practical terms as we travel with and trade with our fellow Europeans. However, beyond those practicalities, on a deeper level, the euro is reflective of a common identity. It's symbolic of integration that can act as a guarantor for stability, and it is our most tangible demonstration of the benefits of that stability. It is proof of what we can achieve together when we work together. And we must always remember that this currency is an unprecedented collective endeavour and a testament to the unity imbued by the core principles that underpin our union. And as we confront the consequences of a war, the benefits of these deep-reaching foundations for our currency and for our union are, I believe, more evident and in stark contrast to other states that lack a commitment to those principles of democracy and the rule of law. And that is why the thoughts, the philosophy of your founder, Luigi Sturzo, are so relevant to the work of the Union. I'm going to end by quoting from him when he said that it is a widespread opinion that common morality does not apply to politics. But my experience, long and painful, makes me conceive of politics as a stature of ethics inspired by love of neighbour, made noble by the purpose of the common good. And this noble purpose, the common good, is an apt reminder, I believe, of the contemporary role of the European Union, and I hope a fitting note to conclude on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your insights and inspiring speech. So, a common good that will be developed and is developed by the European Union Before opening, to the question from the public, I just wanted to ask you, like, a general insight of yours. You were saying that the European Union, a great deal of the European Union has been built in time of crisis, and a lot of its success has been, developed to face crisis, like, the Next Generation EU, for instance. But do you think it's possible to think or envision a European Union where member countries will be able, to prepare for challenges and, find, common path, even in ordinary time, in order, to better face future challenges? Do you think, are we getting there, or is still far?
So I do believe that is possible, and I also believe it will be a necessity in the time ahead. You are, of course, absolutely correct to argue and contend that Europe deepens itself the most when faced with the limits of what it has already achieved. And the limits of what you have achieved become most evident at a time of crisis. And a vivid memory for me in the early part of 2020, when the impact of the pandemic was becoming clearer and clearer, was your then finance minister and your current mayor of Rome explaining what he feared could be the economic consequences of the pandemic on your people, on your economy, and what that in turn could mean for the euro area. And it was one of those searing moments when we realized, and Roberto reminded us, of the value of what we have achieved, but also of the limits of that achievement. But the reason why I also argue that we need to find ways of deepening our cooperation outside of moments of crisis is I think it's also become evident that the multiple crises that we have endured affect our politics and in turn affect the centre of politics. And with the challenges that the European political centre is facing, we do need to challenge ourselves to find ways in which that progress can be made outside those moments of crisis, which in turn compose a challenge to the political centre that is at the heart of Europe. Because ultimately, if we have one force that could erode the political centre, which is the multiple effects of many crises, we could also get to a point that that political centre might not be capable of generating the big steps forward that Europe depends upon. Now, I'm optimistic that we could do that. And the main reason I'm optimistic for it is that if I look at the practical progress that Europe has made in other areas, for example, in our dealing with decarbonising our economy, it demonstrates to me that progress is possible in areas, and substantial progress is possible in areas, without moments of imminent acute crisis. Because, of course, the challenge of climate change is that the progress and challenge is incremental, and the great difficulty and the great challenge builds day by day. So yes, we do it. We showed we can do it during COVID. We are, I believe, shown we can change again at a moment of crisis due to the war. But ultimately, policy change that depends on crisis also has limits.
Thank you. Thank you. And I agree, but let's hope. Yes. Please.
Microphone is coming.
My name is Ferdinando Nelli Feroci, and I'm the president of the Istituto Affari Internazionali. Mr. President, thank you very much for your presentation. And I would have two questions, two very specific questions for you. The first one is related to the ESM. You mentioned the fact that hopefully soon the reform of the ESM will be operational. But as you know, there is one country which still has to ratify the new treaty. So my question is, how do you see the prospect of Italy ratifying soon the ESM reform, and whether or not you had an opportunity to discuss this with Minister Giorgetti? Don't want me to reveal any secret of your conversation, but I think it's a subject of interest, even though to a certain extent rather technical. The second question is related to something which you did not mention, and is the proposal that the Commission has presented at the beginning of November for a rather substantial and innovative reform of the Stability Pact, the rules governing fiscal discipline. Few statements, few positions have been expressed by governments on that proposal. My question to you is whether you had a preliminary discussion in the Eurogroup of the proposal, and if you can give us an idea of how much appreciated has been the reform by governments within the Eurogroup. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So is it Fernando? Fernando, thank you very much for both of your questions, and I'll deal with each of them in the order in which you have put them to me. So I'll be meeting Minister Giorgetti after this meeting. So I'm not in a position to reveal the contents of the conversation yet, because I'm looking forward to it this afternoon. It should come as a little surprise, I think, to anybody that given that the Eurogroup has made an agreement to the ratification of the ESM reform treaty, we all hope and expect that we can be in a position to see that full ratification. And as you'll all know, further progress in that ratification was made in Germany in the middle of December of last year. But the way in which I hope, can complete the ratification process will be by the way in which Europe and the Eurogroup works, which is that we cooperate with each other, we engage with each other to deliver the commitments that we make to each other. And I will be talking to Minister Giorgetti about how we can cooperate and how we can work together to make progress on that agenda. Because I'm very much aware of the profile and prominence of the ESM treaty. I'm aware of the comments of your President in relation to the treaty there over the last number of weeks. The importance of this treaty and the ESM isn't just about the fact that Italy has indicated that they don't want to be in a position that they would ever need it in the future, which I can completely understand. But it's also that it is a treaty and an institution that other countries may make use of. And it has use elsewhere that could be of value. And that, I hope, can be an ingredient in a debate that will happen in the time ahead. But as I said, my engagement on this topic today and in the time ahead with Minister Giorgetti and with your government is about cooperation, it's about dialogue, and it's about listening to each other. And that's the spirit in which I'll be discussing that treaty today and in the weeks and months that await. Secondly, in relation to the ESM, the Stability and Growth Pact reform paper, brought forward by Commissioner Gentiloni, so well known to you here. And I do believe that the timing of that proposal and the work that has been brought forward of the Commission are a really good and a very appropriate starting point for a discussion that we will now have. Governments at the moment, I think it is fair to say, are still considering the proposal, and I would expect they will begin to outline more substantive and significant responses in our January ECOFIN meeting and in the meetings in the time ahead. And the March period, in which we will have both a Eurogroup, an ECOFIN, and also there will be a Eurozone summit taking place, I think could be the window in which views become clearer regarding that proposal. If I look at the different strands of views that have been offered so far, I'd make two general points. The first one is that I believe there is a general recognition that the increase in government debt across a wider range of countries due to the impact of the pandemic does mean we need to consider how we can credibly and safely reduce public debt in the future. And the second point I'd make is because the pandemic affected so many countries in different ways and therefore affected public debt in different ways, the credibility of the commitments that we make to reducing that debt and reducing our deficits will be very, very important, and how we can make progress in delivering those commitments. So they'd be the two general observations I'd make. The level of debt and the spread of that debt across the European Union is now going to have an effect on the debate. The credibility of the commitments that we make to each other, and also how we reduce that debt safely, I think will be the areas that governments will want to hear from each other on.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, President. I was the happy Italian ambassador until 6 months ago in Ireland, and you may remember me.
Yes.
I have a particular interest in one aspect. You being, in a way, the observer of how the EU currency is working and the Italian participation in all of this. The point is, we have a bad reputation as debtors, as debt, public debt, but it's not maybe very well known the other part, the fact that the private sector, the family sector is working well, and the fact that we are the second manufacturer in Europe. Mm-hmm. And I mean, having spent 4.5 years of my life in Dublin, and you know, we are encircled by the beautiful Anglo-Saxon world, but both, I mean, societies, the UK and the USA, are major problem in terms of public debt, and as well as for the family and private sector, which is becoming more and more a problem there. So overall, what is your perspective of the Italian participation within the EU currency, taking into account these?
That on a professional level in dealing, Ambassador, and it's nice to see you again, Ambassador, that in dealing with your representatives within the Eurogroup and your ministers, it is a contribution that is exceptionally skillful and constructive. And in the experience that I've had now of dealing with a number of finance ministers for Italy, and I'm looking forward to working closely with Giancarlo in the time ahead. He will build on a tradition of ministers that always make very valuable, very positive, and very wise contributions to the Eurogroup. And I believe are always aware of the need to have a balance between what works for the Italian economy and what is the national economic need of Italy, but as befits a founding member of the European Union, there is always a deep awareness of the European context and of the importance for the Union overall to make progress. And in addition to the depth of the and the strength of the private sector here in Italy, particularly with regard to manufacturing and your extraordinary success there. It is also the fact that you're one of the few economies that regularly deliver primary budget surpluses in the management of your public finances. And I have always seen great efforts from your ministers to manage their finances in a way that are safe for Italy, safe for Europe, while also making a contribution to the ability of the Italian economy to grow. So that would be my assessment of that contribution, and it's one that I know will only build and strengthen in the years to come.
There's another question. Yes. If you could introduce yourself.
Milan Touš, I'm from the Embassy of the Czech Republic. Mr. President, thank you very much for your very valuable views on the Eurozone, what is happening in the Eurozone. I have two questions. One is regarding the national fiscal policy. I would like to know your opinion, how to deal best with the limits of the fiscal policy in a situation of high inflation and a need to support the most vulnerable people and companies which are facing the challenges of the high energy. So how to best cope with these limits? And the second question would be with regards to the coordination of the fiscal policies on the EU level and on the Eurogroup level. What can be achieved with the best possible coordination between the member states of the Eurogroup and the EU? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and also congratulations to you on your very successful presidency of the European Union, and in particular the conclusion of your presidency in December, when you reached agreement on so many difficult matters. Was an exceptional achievement that I hope you're proud of, and the engagement of your minister on some very difficult matters was a very impressive thing to see. So to go on to your first question regarding the design of national fiscal policy, it is tremendously demanding, and I know this from my experience in Ireland, not to mention my experience of the debate within the Eurogroup, because understandably you have households and that you have employers that need support to protect jobs and to protect living standards. And those demands are made in the aftermath of a very high level of government involvement during the time of COVID. So when you're, as a minister, facing these demands, getting the balance right between how you can help, but not wanting to further add to the increase of prices within your economy, is the challenge that we are all facing at the moment. In terms of how we can do that at a national level, it does appear to me there are three elements to that for the time ahead. The first one is what is the scale of that intervention? And if energy prices and inflationary pressures begin to moderate and improve during the year, is there an opportunity for the scale of budgetary response to be calibrated to reflect that improvement? Secondly, it will be the challenge of how we manage the taxation of the energy sector, given that many of us, including Ireland, reduced taxes on energy, forms of energy, when prices were very high. And if those forms of energy and their prices begin to change, what does that mean for our tax policy? So I think they're the two areas that we'll all be working on. And to then lead to your second question regarding coordination, the best way in which this can be done is in a coordinated way. Because as the Finance Minister of Ireland, when I was making these changes a year ago, I was always compared to what every other economy is doing. So when I was making a decision with regard to VAT or sales tax in Ireland, I was always evaluated against what the nearest European economies to Ireland were doing. So if we're going to try to have a more appropriate budgetary policy for 2023, if the energy and inflation situation improves, I think actually the best way in which we can achieve that is trying to give ourselves the confidence of changing together. But this is not easy. It's politically and economically challenging, but it is one of the main reasons we have the Eurogroup. And it'll be a big theme of our engagement in the week after next.
Thank you. Thank you, President.
And in fact, next week, actually, I should say, rather than the week after next.
Thank you, President. I know your agenda is quite tight, so allow me to ask you the last question, which is, about the big elephant in the room, which is the inflation crisis we are all living. Do you think we have already hit the peak, or should we expect more inflation rising in the next year? And moreover, what is the link between, the energy crisis and inflation? I know that, the inflation crisis in Europe has different nature. And the last point is, can we transform this into something positive? And I'm talking about, for instance, investing. You were saying, we need a correlation of policy trends in order to face inflation. Can this include also the building of a more sustainable and greener Europe, also in response to the US Inflation Reduction Act?
Sure. So if you look at the inflation forecast and history for the euro area, last year it was approximately 9%. For this year, the expectation is that it will be in the band of 6 to 7%. And for next year, the expectation is that it will be approximately 3%. So our forecasts at the moment would indicate that we will see a moderation and a reduction in the inflationary trends within our economies. But even if we are moving off a peak inflation level, while that's really good news, on the other hand, the challenge is the inflation that it is moving to is still too high. Inflation of 6 to 7% is something that will make our societies poorer, and even though it is an improvement on last year, it is still one that from an economic and from a social perspective is too high, which is why the question regarding the design of budgetary policy for this year and for next year will be a really important project for us. Can we salvage something possible from the awful war that the people of Ukraine are now facing? Yes, we can, but our first priority has to be how we can support the Ukrainian people and their economy. What could that salvaging of something positive from this dark moment look like? A peaceful, growing, stable Ukraine that is part of our European family, and a greener and healthier Europe because of how we change our energy policy today. They would be the two historic opportunities that await us, that we have to rise to, and I'm confident that we can.
Thank you. Thank you, President. And thank you, Loredana. If you want to take the floor to conclude.
Just thank you. Thank you very much for this frank, open, and also inspiring conversation. Thank you for your positive message. I think that this is what we really need to hear right now. And I'm also bringing back with me your message of the importance of strengthening the collective effort. I think this is really important. We cannot overcome any crisis alone, and I think this is very clear again today. I particularly appreciated the way you underlined the need for more solidarity and, of course, for more coordination. And I think that this is what I'm bringing back with me. So thank you very much. It was really an honor for us to have you here as your first visit of the year. Thank you. Thank you very much.